Hi everyone. Today's tutorial is alcohol ink on vellum. I'm using a 55-pound vellum and I'm using full sheet today, 9 by 12. I've attached 4 sides with Scotch tape to a Lazy Susan, which has been protected with a plastic wrap just to keep it protected. I'm also using an alcohol, or an alcoholic as I call it, wash, which is isopropyl alcohol. As you see in the back there, it's a 91% solution. You can purchase it at a pharmacy. And I've added 3 drops of Sunbright Yellow by Jacquard Pinata. I've chosen the yellow just because it's not offensive with any of the 3 colors I'll end up using. I'm showing you here Rainforest Green, Baja Blue, and Passion Purple, all by Jacquard Pinata. I also show you Senorita Magenta and the Calabaza Orange. I end up not using them. And the reason is that when I started out, I thought, well, I'll just try using just the Jacquard Pinata inks. And as I started laying them out, beginning with the Rainforest Green, I realized these are very heavily pigmented inks, which is a wonderful thing. Not only are they beautiful, beautiful colors, but each drop has got a heck of a lot of pigment in it. So I probably overdid it a little bit with the Baja Blue there. And as I was putting down the next color, which is the Passion Purple, I realized that the reds weren't going to make it because this is plenty of ink. So I only put 2 drops of the purple. And with alcohol ink, if you're not familiar with it, sometimes less is more. In fact, most times less is more. This is going to turn out to be a bit darker at the end than what some of my other pieces have been. I still like it very, very much. I suppose I could have worked it for another hour, but I wanted it to be a short video and I wanted to show how quickly you can actually put these pieces together. So I've taken that alcohol with a couple of drops of ink color in it, my wash, and I've pretty liberally dropped it. I would not advocate a spray bottle, by the way, because it's bad enough that there's fumes, which I'll be talking about in a moment, but spray bottles just lift all the alcohol into the air, makes it easier to breathe, not a good thing. So I use a drop bottle, and as I say, I dropped a fairly liberal amount on to the drops that I had placed on the vellum. I'm really trying at this stage just to loosen up the pigments, which the alcohol is having the effect of doing, and the craft dryer, which is not a heat gun, it is in fact a craft dryer, like a hair dryer, is being used to move those pigments around very quickly because alcohol and alcohol ink dry incredibly quickly because of the level or the speed of evaporation, and even more so because I've got a warm craft dryer aimed at them. So the speed with which these are evaporating and drying is very, very quick. So you don't have a lot of time to work them. And as you'll see here, using the Lazy Susan, at least for me, helps tremendously because I can address several different sides, and there's where the colors are blending, and I'm sort of showing that I'm getting a nice blend there. Using the Lazy Susan allows me to go from one side to the other and keep the craft dryer aimed away from my face. So what I don't want to do is aim the craft dryer over top of the alcohol, have it pick up the fumes and blow them straight at my face. Not a good thing, unless I'm wearing some sort of a respirator. I do in the background have a hood fan over a stove right next to me. My studio is in a summer kitchen in the basement of our home. So I'm very fortunate because I have not only the oven here to do some clay work, but I also have the fan over top of the stove, which takes the fumes directly outside, and there's a bathroom next to that, which has another fan in it, which also removes fumes and takes them to the outside. So ventilation is crucial when you're working with alcohol and alcohol inks. They're also flammable. Again, a heat gun is not what you want to use. You want to use a craft dryer, or you can use a straw, or you can blow right on it if you wish. But as I point out, alcohol and ink both dry very quickly because of the rate of evaporation. And what happens in the process is that you're seeing the alcohol wash picking up and dissolving momentarily bits of that pigment in the ink and moving it. So it's flowing as though it's in water, and it's drying at the same time. So the beauty of that, you can't really see it very closely here, but as you start working with it, what you'll see is that if you start blowing the ink back and forth on top of itself, you start getting the effect of folds of fabric, because there's the ink is and the pigment in the ink is moving along and depositing itself back and forth, and it creates really lovely shadows and folds. Quite beautiful. So at this stage in the project, what I'm really doing is putting on as much of the wash as I can handle. I'm generally putting it, as I just pointed out there, on places where the ink has accumulated or the pigment has accumulated. And I know that there is ample color there, that if I drop the wash on it, the wash will dissolve the pigment just enough that it can be picked up in the wash and moved around as I aim the dryer at it. And while it's moving, it moves initially very quickly, and then it slows very quickly because it's drying. So you really have, as I pointed out earlier, very limited amount of time. You really want to work with it's quite quick once you've dropped the alcohol wash down. If you are looking to move it anywhere, you want to do that with relative speed. So I have my little craft dryer sitting, just pointing out some other kind of neat areas and where they're mixing and there's tendrils and things forming. But you want to have your tools handy. You want to have them close at hand. You'll see that I close that alcohol wash bottle whenever I put it down. It's just, I'm trying to, again, be cognizant of the safety. I don't want it, if it spills, I don't want it to spill, number one. So that's a big thing, especially having alcohol. But again, because it's flammable, because it's there's fumes that aren't really good to be breathing in, I try to maintain as safe an area as I can and keep everything fairly close at hand, and not wear sleeves that are going to knock things over, which I was doing before I started this video, and realized that that was not a really good example to be setting, as I was knocking little ink bottles over. So you need to, I'm just holding it up so you get an idea of how it's coming along. And I'm realizing at this point, these colors need to be worked a bit because the pigments are so dark. And it will end up being a bit darker of a piece, which is fine by me. I quite enjoy it, because when you see it at the end, and I'll post a picture of the completed piece as well, there are some beautiful light movement areas, really gorgeous, and then there's some darker areas, which in my perspective, it's not everyone's cuppa, but from my perspective, those dark areas are quite beautiful too, because they as shadows and places that recede or move backward are just as important as the lit areas. So it's a bit of a study of light and shadow, and I quite enjoy it. I don't like every piece to be exactly the same or wispy without any dark places. And as I say, with this one, I realized fairly quickly that, well, I could sit here and work on it for an hour and a half. And really, really wisp out those colors. I actually quite liked that there was different tones of the colors, that there was some very dark places, some shadowy places. So you'll see at the end, it comes out to be quite an interesting piece. It doesn't look like florals when it's done. It doesn't really look like a landscape or, a picture of the great outdoors. It really looks like an abstract of faces, which is very common for these pieces, and shapes and things. And I suppose, as many people have said to me, and I have to agree, they're very mesmerizing, very relaxing. I quite enjoy just sitting and staring at some of them because they're just that intriguing, and I find some of the most interesting shapes and faces and things in them. So I've taped the corners down. That just not only allows you to see what's going on a little bit easier, but I'm trying to attack a couple of the negative spaces and fill them in a little bit more, the ones up at the corners. And I wasn't able to do that as easily when the corners were curling up a bit because they were pulling the color back on itself. So I just taped the corners back so that allows for a bit more free-form movement. And what I'm trying to do at this point is to not entirely eliminate the negative space on the outside. I like to have a little bit of whiteness there because it's, for me anyway, it's a nice perspective to have this moving image on the front and the white on the back. But I still want there to be more of a wispiness and airiness of the image extending out onto the sides and the edges. So I'm still using a fair amount of the wash, and as time goes on, and I've tried to keep this video short, it's 15 minutes today, so we'll be nearing the end fairly quickly here. But what I will be doing is adding less and less of the wash as I go on, because there are places where I want to preserve the way that the image looks, and there are other places that I want to perhaps spread the color around a bit. I'm showing some of the neater areas that I really like. And there's a couple of places there on the blue and on the green that I'm just going to tickle a little bit with that wash. I'm moving the ink around a bit. I'm moving that pigment and letting it pretty much go where it wants. It's forming a little bit, some tendrils or fingers, some people call them. Some people don't care for those fingers. They think it looks too much like drips. I like them. I especially like them in florals because they, especially in an abstract, they give you that sense of stems or parts of leaves. Just something a little bit different. And in fact, even the edges of petals will sometimes have tendrils on them. I think of calla lilies, for example, and you'd want a tendril because that's how they look. If you're an exacting person, but it just gives you that sort of that idea of something that's quite free-flowing and organic. And so that's what I'm working on. It's not necessarily to create the tendrils, but for the ones that happen to show themselves, I'm entertaining them and moving them along and trying to enhance their appearance. And so again, I shake on just a little bit, not quite as much as I was at the beginning, on a couple of places in the center with that Baja blue and the passion purple, and just moving that pigment away from where it had accumulated. And if the pigment's too dark for you, or if it's mixing and you don't like the color that's it is mixing to be, which is often some side of a sort of brown, there's a couple of ways of getting rid of it, just giving you a bit of an idea of how it's looking there. You can either put some of the wash on and move that dark color, undesirable color, at least dissolve it, move it to the edge or right off of the paper, or you can pick it up with a paper towel from the paper itself. So in other words, if there are areas of ink or pigment that you don't want, my suggestion is that you add some of the alcohol wash to them, allow that undesired or unwanted ink or pigment to loosen up a little bit under the wash, and either pick it up directly from the page with a little piece of paper towel, or push it over with a dryer or a straw or whatever it is you're using over to the edge of the page or right off the page. If you've got enough protection on the outside of your page, in other words on your work surface, then by all means just scoot that ink right off the edge, or lift it with a towel, as I said earlier, because that's also quite effective. And it's often done with watercolors, so it can certainly be done with alcohol ink. And here I'm just really looking and trying not to overwork, but acknowledging some of the areas that have enough pigment that if I want to move the ink out a little bit more and just add a bit more interest on the edges, I can do that. And so I'm moving a bit of the purple and moving the ink back on itself, which creates some of the folding effects that I was talking about earlier. It almost looks like smoke or wisps of fabric. And if you are after that kind of an effect, that's how it's done. You move the dryer back and forth, and you're really moving the ink onto itself as it's drying very, very quickly. And that, I think, is going to be the end. That's the trick. Where do you stop? And I'm done. Thanks again for joining me.